Hi, friends. Pastor Mike down in his study in Karen's sewing room. I'm going to introduce the February spiritual practice. But here's the question: how does God let you know stuff? We'll come back around to that. Prior to the pandemic, there was a study done on churches and how they describe themselves. And the vast majority of churches in America describe themselves as either conflicted or complacent. In fact, less than 10% of churches said that they're alive and growing and vital and making a big difference. And so, based on that study, another person went out and said, well, what is that 10% of churches doing that gets them such good results? And she found 10 practices that these churches have in common oftentimes. These are the practices we're doing as monthly themes. And the number one practice, and by far away number one, and every church she studied had it, was hospitality, was practicing a warm welcome. But the second practice, and what she said was the second most important practice, might surprise you. It was the spiritual practice of discernment. How God lets us know stuff. What to say yes to and what to say no to, so that we can better able give and receive love. We have a hard time saying no. There's a lot of demands for our commitments, and sometimes in our lives it feels like the tail is wagging the dog if we don't practice discernment. Discernment, Wendy Wright writes, is not identical to problem solving. It's not simply a question of lining up the pros and cons concerning a decision and determining which gains the most support or which will benefit us or others in the long run. No, discerning is more like the turning of a sunflower to the sun. It's an intuitive hunch, a restless seeking of the heart, longing to find its way. It's when an artist searches for the right line, and then when found, she says yes. Discernment is about feeling texture and assessing weight, watching the plumb line and listening for overtones, feeling the quickening and surrendering to love. It's being grasped in the Spirit's arms and led in the rhythms of an unknown dance. Wendy Wright. When it comes to discernment, maybe one of the reasons churches aren't real good at it is the way we pray. There's basically two ways of praying. One is full of words and really beautiful content, and both ways of praying are real good. In the first way of prayer, it's more of a left brain thing. When you pray litanies or do a guided reflection or you pray for others in your prayer life, this is that kind of word-based prayer, and it's overemphasized in our congregations. So much so that listening prayer is something a lot of people haven't had much experience with. But this is the kind of prayer that leads to discernment, to how God lets us know stuff. In a listening prayer, there isn't any content per se. It's more like you're resting in Jesus' loving gaze, paying attention to your breath, silent meditation. We call it centering prayer, maybe with a prayer word, just one. But when you're discerning and you're doing this kind of right brain prayer, you spend more time emptying and being still than you do in using beautiful words and letting God know your desires. So during the month of February, we're going to practice how God lets us know stuff in different ways of praying, and how discernment is something that a whole congregation can do together. It'll be an interesting month.